Hello, and welcome to the Comedian's Paradise. This is a podcast where we speak to comedians, comedy promoters, and comedy writers from across the comedy world. And today's guest is the guy who I met 9 years ago at my own gig in Hammersmith, and where I last met him, I dressed up as Zorro. He is an amazing comedian. He's an amazing host, television presenter. He is also a men's mental health advocate. He's a guy who's wrote an award-winning book called, oh, for fuck's sake, Weight Expectations. Weight Expectations. And it's a great book. Explores his recovery from anorexia. It's also a part self-help guide. He's a guy that's been through lots of different things. He's a vegan. He was a former anorexic. But now he's an award-winning stand-up who knows how to keep himself healthy and in his shape. Please welcome Dave Chawner.
Marvin, I love that intro. I think that is brilliant. And I think more introductions need to be like that. Of like, there's a little stuff. Oh fuck! Halfway through, I think that's beautiful. Beautiful.
It's a bit of a strange thing because I remembered it before it, but then when when I went live, I got a bit starstruck. Well,
what is that though? I've noticed this when you get sort of people on stage or just in any unfamiliar sort of environment, that everything goes out of your mind, but you feel like you've got to keep moving, and then it's like that. Yeah, I don't get that.
I think I'm gonna put that as a video in the pod. So, Dave, for anyone that doesn't know about you, give us a little bit of a brief intro about yourself and how you end up speaking with us today.
So yeah, I do comedy. I've done comedy for a while, sort of on the circuit. I like doing shows about weird things, and that's kind of led me into different stuff. And love doing festivals. We're doing more club comedy at the moment, and I think I ended up here purely because, well, not purely because, but we gigged together 9 years ago, and I saw you in Edinburgh, and we had a really good chat. Loads to talk about with Edinburgh itself, but yeah, I suppose it know each other from the circuit.
Yes, we're also cousins as well. No, that's a lie. That's a lie. Well, maybe I could have played in the line. That could have been quite funny, but but yeah, there's a so one of the things that I like about we gigged together. Well, I think it was it was when I used to run free nights and now I changed it to paid nights. But yeah, I think I remember you doing I know you MC'd it, didn't you? I put you as a host, didn't I?
I think it was, yeah. I kind of remember that, and I remember it being genuinely a really lovely gig. Because I used to live around Hammersmith, so I don't actually get opportunity to go around there. So yeah, it was a really nice night, a really nice opportunity to go back, and really good gig.
It's honestly, it's an absolutely amazing area, apart from some parts. I mean, it is mostly a good area for most part, but I
Yeah.
do remember I had my one and only experience where an apprentice mugger tried to mug me. But
What?
it was right next, it's in a side road of, the pub that you went to go and MC.
Yeah.
And it was some guy with dreadlocks. It was a very weird experience because I was on my phone trying to find a place to get a haircut before the gig. I was looking around. The guy goes in with his bike in the way, and he goes, "Oh, you're taking pictures, taking a picture of me." I said, "No, I'm just trying to find a haircut." And then he gritted his teeth, tried to get me into an argument with him. "Oh, you're getting Larry." And I said, "I just want to get a haircut." So I realized what was going on, and I thought, right, I'll walk the other way where I saw someone who works at the pub. So I thought I'd walk towards him. So if anything happens, at least there's two of us against one. And then when I walked round, he didn't bother chasing after me. And I don't know, he just said something like, "Oh, you're supposed to get mugged," or something, like a little kid. I don't know, I couldn't hear exactly, but that's the demeanor and the impression. And it was a bit like, bloody hell, I thought you put more effort into mugging me than that.
That's so pathetic. That's great. I love that because it shows that everyone forgets that people have to do everything for the first time sometimes, and even mugging. And do you reckon that guy might be on a mugging podcast now, and they might be going, "Tell us about your first mugging, and then they're going to go, well, actually, it was a failed mugging in Hammersmith, and that's really funny, man.
It's I tried to mention it at a gig straight after, but
That's funny.
it was a bit stupid as well because I know that uh, he's not more commonly known as Uncle Roger now, but Nigel Unn also used to live in Hammersmith, and he said, right, I think it was maybe a few weeks down the line, right, when the COVID happened and all that, and he said that he got attacked by someone. But he said, "Oh, you know what you did. You know what you did." And I was thinking because maybe some someone's mistaken me for Nigel Unn before, which is a bit of a strange thing. We're performing styles are very different. We sound very different. We walk very different. Me and Nigel, if he's listening, we know we're very different people. And for someone to think that we're the same person is a bit strange. So I don't know. There's a theory I'm thinking that someone thought that me and him are the same and attacked him rather than me.
That's brilliant. Oh, that is brilliant. Well, not for you, obviously.
But do you think it could be a possibility?
I mean, mate, stranger things have happened at sea, you know?
But anyway, sorry for the mad story. But what's
No.
have you had any mad stories like that, Dave, that made you?
You know what? Surprisingly, I don't think I've ever been mugged. That's not like an invite if anyone's listening and thinks, you know what, that guy deserves it. He needs a mugging. Don't think I've ever been mugged or anything like that. I've been mugged off, but never actually mugged myself.
Oh yeah, me too. I think I've yeah. I think as a person in yeah. I th what's comedy's a mad place, right? But I mean, the thing about it is what I love about doing the podcast as a whole, and this is I get to see so many different people from across the globe on it, and there's so many different backgrounds from it. Like the people
Mm,
that are in comedy, for better or worse, there's such you get all sorts in it from all different
mm.
backgrounds, and that's what makes it such an interesting place.
Yes. 100%. I think that's what kind of got me into comedy in the first place was that um, comedy was a beautiful circus of these kind of very multifaceted people. And I think the thing that I really like about comedy is that nobody was trying to fit in. People were trying to stand out in their own ways. And I thought that was really beautiful. And I think that's what makes comedy generally, and I'm sure some people might disagree with me, but I think that's what's generally quite inclusive about comedy, that you have people that were openly, I mean, look at, Eddie Izzard, openly sort of transvestite was even in the main sort of zeitgeist. There's loads of history of people being, very openly camp, openly gay, openly sexually experimenting years before general society was ready to have that conversation. I think that's what's really nice about comedy is that it is very accepting of difference.
And is what is it about the comedy game? So what is it that made you? We mentioned it just now, already, that what you love about the people, but what is it that made you fall in love with it at the start of your comedy journey, and what is it that made you fall in love with it now that keeps you in the comedy game?
I think the second question is a lot harder to answer than the first. I think what made me get into comedy, I always loved having a laugh, and people at school were always very funny. And I remember going to house parties and stuff, and people would be watching Lee Evans DVDs, and we always found that really funny. And then we'd start quoting little bits back to us. And I remember a guy, he was a lovely guy. We used to call him Carter. That was his nickname. And Carter came up to me and he was like, "There's this guy, you would love him. Have you heard of him? It's called Peter Kay." And I was like, "No." And he was like, "Right." And then he saw me the next day and he didn't say anything. And he just gave me this VHS video of Live at the Bolton Albert Halls. And he was like, "Watch that." And I was like, "Oh." And we had our cousins over that weekend and we watched it. And I was just like, "What is this thing? This is just brilliant fun." And I'd never seen comedy before until I was very lucky. I went to university and I went in Southampton and there was this live comedy club. And I think when I was a teenager, I was always very kind of lost. I always didn't really sort of struggling to sort of fit in and what am I doing with my life and stuff. And I think the thing that I really loved about stand up was, and it was such a good club that people were talking about such varied, mad things. And I've always been drawn to stand up that asks questions that are actually quite logically valid, but you never hear asking anywhere else. And I think to answer the second part of that question of what keeps me in this, I was listening to another podcast a while ago, Comedian to Comedian podcast, and it was the Russell Howard episode. And something that really stuck with me, I was like, oh wow. And Russ said, you're only 6 months away from being a phenomenal comedian. If you really put your mind to it today, in 6 months' time, then you can be absolutely killer. And I remember just thinking, wow, that is absolutely true. And I'd got kind of lazy and I hadn't been writing as much. And I think the thing that is sort of keeping me in it at the moment is I think a lot of stuff in life is about momentum. And I've tried, and some days failed, some days succeeded, to write for at least an hour a day. And what has been weird is there's the law of increasing returns of as I've been writing for an hour a day, the writing has been getting better and the ideas have been getting weirder and the concepts have been getting more fun. And I get more excited to write more and more and more. And I'm already very excited about next year's Edinburgh show. And I think that is ultimately what keeps me, and I think a lot of people in comedy, of the promises what have yet to come.
Oh, yeah. It's an unpredictable beast, isn't it, comedy?
100%. And I think, funny enough, I was talking to Sean Walsh on Monday, and he has just done a 3-month theatre play. Um, and we were talking, and he went, I was an actor for 3 months, and I literally haven't gigged in 3 months, like not anything. I didn't have time because I was acting. And he was like, and it really gave me perspective to see how mad what we do is. And I do think he has actually a very prescient point there of what you are doing can make you very vulnerable. You are very susceptible to, because when people say that they perhaps don't like your humor, no one ever says, I don't like your humor, or I don't like your act, or I don't like your show, or I don't like your jokes. People say, I don't like you. I didn't like you. Not what are you doing? I didn't like you. And I think that can make you even more vulnerable. And then on the flip side of that, we all know that there's a drive and a push to fake it till you make it and dress for the job that you want. And I think people are kind of torn in between these competing schools of what should be right. And weirdly, in stand up, there is no defined career path that you have in sort of many, office jobs. It's, yes, you start off as an open micer, then a middle, then an opener, then a headliner. There is that sort of general thing. But we've all done gigs where you can be a headliner at one gig and then the open spot at another, and vice versa. And I think that can really play about with ego and pride and confidence. And there's a lot of stuff in the mix with stand-up that I think can be really helpful to your mental health. But I also think, because I always bang on about mental health, I do think that there's a lot of things that can be potentially detrimental as well.
Hmm. What you just say things that are detrimental?
I think there's status angst. I've tried to write a show about this and it didn't really hit the mark um you, as I say, you can be a headliner in one place and an open spot in the other, and that can make you feel not good enough. And sometimes the ways that people deal with not being good enough is they, sort of start to uh convince everybody else so that they might hopefully by proxy convince themselves, I'm great, I'm brilliant. I also think that with stand-up, unfortunately, it is a subjective medium. Like you can write the best jokes in the world, but if you don't have that connection, it's not going to land, and different people and different areas might connect with you in different ways. Like, for example, if sort of if you go to, I don't know, say Liverpool is a good example, with a very kind of RP accent. Oh, hello, hello. There is a sort of barrier to overcome there, because they're like, you're not one of mine. And, then you do gigs like the Royal Variety Performance, where it's very middle class. And if you come out being like, oh, then they're like, well, there's no way that I can relate to this person. So that you're constantly trying to connect with other people. And there's a real irony there that it's lonely. Because when you're free, other people are at work. And when you're working, other people are socializing. And that made me hugely lonely when I first went full time, because I would just see all these people having a lovely night, having pints with their mates, having a laugh, mucking about. And I was like, I would like a night off. I would like to do that.
Is yeah. You mentioned something that is a very big thing that I've encountered from a few comics. There's a comedian that I had on the podcast, and I didn't know anything about sort of road comics in America before I interviewed him. But there's a comedian that I had on a podcast called Stuart Huff, who's built a very long career of being a road comic. And he says, yeah, he enjoys the challenge of that because he's going to different parts of America, and he's quite surprised about it. Like, he even went to a KKK village where there was a few people that, he's quite left wing, but he did quite well over there because there's a lot of people that had, they were like him, but they were in a place where they couldn't go because they were too connected with their job and family, so they
Mm.
couldn't leave. But he also found that people are racist in liberal cities. He says it's all based on the individual. And he says when he's traveling across America, the point is he enjoys the challenge of adjusting his jokes so he knows how to communicate that concept. And he says if a joke's well written enough or performed well enough, you can even convert people who are against your opinion to your opinion if you're very
100%.
good at it. Yeah. And what a lot of people said, they say that stand up in a way is a bit like a sales job, getting people to your side of view.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't like to see it as sales, but I think there's certainly an element in that. I think there's a certain uh alchemy of it. And I think one of the things that's beautiful about comedy is that it can knock your edges off, that you can think you're Mr. Billy Big Balls one day and then you get knocked down. And I genuinely believe that actually comics, um, perhaps more so in the UK, being a little island, have a real temperature test on what general people think. Because yes, you can do, gigs down in Brighton and everyone's vegan and, just stop oil protesters, and, your stuff about climate change or whatever might go down an absolute fucking storm there. But then if you go up to Scunthorpe or Scarborough or Blackpool and try and be very like, yeah, we need to do that, then perhaps in different communities like that, that's not their main priority. Their main priority might be lack of jobs, lack of housing, maybe class struggle, whatever it is. And I think, yeah, I think you have to be very good at connecting with people. And I think that can be a challenge in and of itself.
How how do you manage to communicate your personal background, what things have happened to you? Like, I know in some places with it being, um, as you said, Liverpool, where if you do you mention that you're vegan, you said, do they get, what, you're fucking vegan, you think you're better than us? I mean, that's a common thing. How do you sort of communicate with them when they give you that?
It's such a fine line, because I think you're torn betwixt a rock and a hard place. Because on the one side, you want to be authentically, completely, 100% your own self in no matter what, sort of room. But sometimes if people, for example, the vegan thing, no one likes a vegan. And if you push too hard on that, people are like, oh, here he is, he's going to bang on again. But then also there's the other side of that as well, of trying to fit in and be something you're not. And you've you come across like a substitute teacher that's trying to be cool and down with their kids, and it's just really grating and horrible. And I think different ways that I've found it, I think self-deprecating is that's sort of something that I rely on quite a lot so that you can get the first punch in before anybody else does. I think reading the room is really important as well. And that's why I always generally like to see audiences before I go on and see the sort of performance space. And I think a really big thing of that as well is identity of knowing who you are and knowing where the laughs are coming from. Are the laughs coming from because people are laughing at you, or are the laughs coming from, you're basically trying to get laughs against a certain group. And I think that that can be quite challenging. And I think that's why, personally, for me, I think the main thing, yeah, it does sort of self-deprecating, because there's nothing worse than if I do a fucking rugby club in Taunton. They're just going to see right through if I'm like, all right, lads, how's it going? Oh, bloody lovely here. They're going to be like, well, that's obviously not you. You're obviously not that kind of guy. What are you doing in your M&S sweatshirt trying to pretend that you're one of the people?
The- what do you do to relate with people that are different to you? Do you try and get more really in depth on like the personal thing when you're talking about like why you went into veganism? Like you say, I got into veganism because I saw this person, that person. Or you do something that could relate to them, like
It's weird though, like I don't really like the veganism thing, and I'm a terrible vegan. I mean, there are so many more people that are better, like Adele Cliff and Carl Donnelly and Tom Ward, that are so much better vegans than I will ever be. I think for me, the challenge is always mental health. I think that's always like the challenge is like to talk about mental health in sort of perhaps communities and settings that people don't see. And I think to try and win people over, I think you've got to firstly acknowledge that difference or that gap before you can bridge it. So, for example, being, yeah, let's say a rugby club, acknowledge that thing of like, this is the first time I've ever been in a rugby club, etc. And you can also um magnify that difference as well. Of, like when I asked for Prosecco, they spat in my face, sort of thing, and sort of show that you're not from that background. But I think ultimately, I think people want to connect, especially in comedy. And I think one of the things that can be overlooked and forgotten is that people are ultimately there to laugh. People aren't there necessarily to, be on your Christmas card list or, go on summer holidays together. So as long as you can make them listen, then hopefully you can make them laugh.
hmm, okay. Effectively, you've got to be a good reader of people, and it's like you
Yes.
mentioned, connection.
Yes.
You got to really, really understand. Yeah, effectively, comedians, we need a psychology degree.
Well, and that is actually one of the things that I find fascinating in this. And I've just bought a couple of books on cold reading, how like magicians, sort of use body language in order to help, because there's so many tough things. And I think we've all done gigs where there have been people that have been crossed armed, sort of sour face sitting in the front row. And this is also one of the limitations, I think, of body language and a reliance on sort of pop psychology. We've all done that thing where there'll be some bloke sitting in the front row, and they've got their arms crossed, they've got their coat on, they're looking really grumpy. You're like, oh, fucking cheer up, mate. And it actually might be that he's having a lovely time. He's just quite hard to make laugh, and he's a little bit cold, which is why he's crossing his arms. Also, we've done completely the opposite, where I did a gig the other day. 42 squaddies came in, and they're like, oh, and then you get to the stage and there was this fucking roar of applause. And back in the day, I'd have been like, oh, these people are really up for it. But I actually knew that they were essentially pissing on their territory like a dog would piss on a lamppost. We own this space. We are the dominant group. And actually, the only way that I could think to win them over was to draw back, was to go more quiet, was to let that silence hang before I say anything. Because if you just try and shout over them, you're just going to enter this pissing contest. So yeah, I think a lot of it is psychology, and that's the sort of area that I find really funny. And also I think it's really important to say is my limitations. I think I focus on that too much. I am very envious of street performers because that is the hardest fucking gig in the world when there's, people selling two apples for £1 down the road. There's no even fucking roof going on. You've got a motorist honking his horn and they still capture people's attention. I think that's amazing. Whereas if I go into a comedy club and the TV's on, I'm like, right, that needs to get switched off. And then, they'll be like, oh, they're serving the bar. No, you need to stop serving. All of these things. And I think I rely on that over controlling psychology a bit too much.
Mm. Yeah. What element of truth is there in terms of you learn everything in the shit gigs and your bad gigs rather than the good ones?
I think there's a lot of truth. And I think one of the things that I wish that I've been told when I started comedy is that different people have different things that they need to hear. And I used to devour these podcasts. I used to read all of the stand-up comedy books because I ultimately felt that there wasn't a sort of metaphysical truth out there. There was the perfect gig, the perfect comedian, the perfect way to do comedy. But I think the truth is, different people need different bits of advice. So, absolutely, there are some people that learn from the shit gigs. And I think there is an absolute truth in that. Um, but I also think there is a real truth of if you are just doing shit gigs, then I've got to be honest. I remember when I first moved to London and, I heard you learn more in the shit gigs. But then my sort of style became very tailored to playing rooms that were just filled with comedians, playing to rooms where there were loads of in jokes. And actually, ultimately, is that really going to help you to progress to an area that you want to get in, or are you just going to be the king at playing open mic gigs with loads of comedians? So I think, like everything, there is, of course, a kernel of truth in that. And I've definitely learned, from harder gigs, but I think I do actually learn quite a lot from the Ripper gigs as well, because they bolster my confidence. And I genuinely think confidence is a huge area that I need to improve on. So, although there is an element of truth in that you learn from the shit gigs, I, I'm always nervous to say this is the paradigmatic thing that everyone needs to hear.
Hmm. Now, with comedy as a whole, being with the unique characters you met and some amazing comics on there, who are comedians that what what has been an incident recently where you've learnt from someone else's bomb?
That's really interesting. Um, as a question, I will name this because I'm comfortable. On Tuesday, Joshua Bethania was doing a gig, and he is a phenomenal. And he did his opening joke, and a woman was howling with laughter, like genuinely howling, like paroxysms of laughter, like she couldn't control herself. And he acknowledged it and it got a big laugh because you couldn't not. But then she kept on laughing. And I could see that he was like, I don't know what to do because it was about 4 minutes into the gig and he'd only said his opening joke and people were laughing at this woman who couldn't contain her laughter. And he was kind of like, oh God, I don't know what to do. And it's a very nice problem to have, but it really showed me that sort of how fragile that control of the room can be. And it's certainly, I wouldn't say it was necessarily a bomb, but I definitely think, ironically, it was a squeaky bum time for him because he only had a certain amount of time. And I could see him being like, oh God, that's eked away. Like, I've done my opening joke and this woman won't stop laughing. And it was almost like a heckle, but a nice one and a beautiful one. And I think what I kind of learned from that, I think, was I suppose the importance of controlling the room. Um, and I suppose, ironically, as well, going with things. So, yeah, comedy can always teach you weird things.
And who are comedians that are very different to your personal style, but you admire a lot and you learn a lot from, that you gig with rather than who's on TV?
I think that they're comedians generally tend to admire comedians, and I have good reasons to think this because I I don't watch a lot of comedy, like doing show. You don't really want to watch, but you'll stand at the back, and generally, I wouldn't say 9 times out of ten, 7 or 8 times out of ten, the comedians, if they haven't seen someone before, will be laughing more, will be encouraging more because they know how sort of difficult it is to do what that person is doing. I remember seeing Rich Wilson once posted online a video where someone was heckling and he had a beautiful put down and he said, you know what, mate, you might be the funniest person in your van, but until you have the balls to actually do this and to actually come up here, let the other people speak. And I was like, fair play. And I, to a lesser and larger extent, respect anyone in general, but anyone that like chooses to do comedy. And I'm very lucky to, have very good friends in comedy of like, Robin Perkins. I'm very good friends with her, and she's writing incredible shows at the moment. And Stefan Allen is a beautiful Welsh comedian who we have a good conversation once a week on the phone just to check in and sort of keep in touch. I'm going for a coffee with Jenny Collier later on today, funnily enough, straight after this. So I think there's a real thing of finding your tribe in comedy. And I'm not going to lie, and this doesn't pay me in a natural lie. About a month ago, I went into a just an accidental way where all of the gigs that I was doing were very alpha male, were very people were bullying each other in the green room, people were negging each other, people were bitching and moaning, and that can really put you in a certain type of headspace. And I think finding the people that you like, finding the people that you get, positive sort of affirmation, positive energy from there's something to be really said because it really can muddle your brain. So although I haven't given specific names of, people I admire, I think there's a lot of people I admire, but you admire people for different things. And I am very, very fickle in the sense that if I like someone off stage, I sure as shit am gonna find them 1,000 times funnier on stage.
Oh yeah, I no no. I think that's just straight up truth. It's so much easier to find someone funny if you like him, but whenever you don't like him, you're gonna have this little thing where I don't want to laugh at this. This guy's a scumbag. So you,
I think in a weird way, actually, to kind of answer that question, I think there's almost I wouldn't say it's a respect, but I think I lean too much on like me, love me, and I do find it quite impressive, I suppose would be the word, of people that make absolutely no bones of trying to get the audience to like them, yet they still do. I think that's a very impressive trait.
Yeah, definitely. And they've had, probably had enough shitty gigs where they don't care anymore. No, I don't know. um, Now, the thing that I admire about a lot of comics, and this is something that I've agree with from the fantastic interviewer who's been in comedy for a very long time, interviewed all sorts of comics, and was a good friend of Malcolm Hardy, John Fleming. He says that what he finds interesting about comedians is not that they them being comedians themselves, it's who they are off stage. And
Mm,
I agree a lot about that. Like in his podcast itself, what I found interesting, all sorts. I think this sounds like I'm blowing up my own trumpet, but so one of the things that I've liked about, I didn't know how diverse the comedy scene was before I started doing the podcast. So there's guys that I had, the Mexican former drug dealer, human trafficker. That was a great story. You got a guy from Zimbabwe who moved to South Africa. He told me stories where I told him about the mugging story. He said the muggers are lazy in London. And then you got like a guy from Malaysia, Rizal. Maybe you met him last year, Rizal Van Gazel.
I
Um,
think so.
he runs the Crack House Comedy Club in Malaysia, and he got arrested because he ran an open mic, and this couple were from a sex cult, and with Malaysia being a very strict Muslim country, one of the girls started stripping, so they got his club closed down. Uh, there's all sorts of craziness from it, and I agree 100% what John Fleming says. I find comedians very interesting because their life outside of it makes them, yeah. I think who you are as a person shapes a lot of your comedy, even if it's a clown or there's an element of, even speaking of clowns in the podcast, even though it doesn't seem like it, there's an element of truth in a lot of performances. I agree on that. And with your background itself being quite interesting, that you like you're vegan, you had anorexia. How did that sort of shape your comedy? Because that must give you obviously a lot of material stuff to work on. But how has that shaped the way you do comedy as a whole?
I think one of the reasons that I got into comedy was an excuse to do weird stuff. I remember when I was growing up, I loved watching Dave Gorman's Google Whack Adventure. I loved reading Danny Wallace's book. I loved watching Mark Thomas. And I think when I was going through therapy, I started writing the show about the anorexia. And one of the things that was beautiful about both therapy and both comedy was it gave you an excuse to do things outside of your comfort zone. And I think that's a really rare opportunity to have. And to answer that question with one of your former questions of what keeps you in comedy is, I think that's one of the things that does keep me in comedy as well. The amount of times you'll speak to a comic and they'll talk about doing something depressing or talk about doing something scary, and the phrase would always be there might be some material in it. And I think that's quite an enriching way to view life, as this could be a potential future anecdote. And I think to answer John's point, off stage, I am a very serious person. I'm a very boring person. I'm a very non-fun person. I wouldn't hang around with me if I had the opportunity. I'm so fucking dull. And I think that comedy gives me that levity and that reminder, because I can get very in my own life and very in my own head, that you actually, this is what it is to have fun. These are ideas of how to enjoy yourself. And I think it's really interesting who comics are by what got them into comedy. And I think there's sort of three or four general reasons that people got into it. But I'd definitely say that was a big one for me, that I'm not a fun person, but I would like to be.
Is he mentioned something like that as well? He's because Malcolm Hardy was known for being mad and crazy, but off stage he was very shy and quiet.
Mm.
So is there an element of that comedy releases a side of us that's sort of tapped in, like
Well,
oh,
I think there's something more to be said about comedy being about shyness, being about social anxiety. I think that's one of the reasons that people do get into comedy is because they find it hard to communicate with other people and they find it hard to connect with other people. So jokes, are a way to make people like you. I think that shyness is so, so common in comedy. And for anyone that sort of disagrees with that, there is a reason that there are green rooms. There are a reason that there are dressing rooms. I find it incredible how social media has almost changed the game of comedy, that there are old school comics who, not in an arrogant way, but they will want to do the gig and then leave because there is that thing, and I think we've all been there of like people coming up to you afterwards and oh my God, I love that, whatever, which is nice, but it's hard. It's uncomfortable to kind of relate to that. It's hard to deal with that in the best of ways. But I think I think that's going to be an interesting thing. And I think perhaps on the positive side, that will get rid of some sort of diva-ishness because I do certainly see not to name any names, there's certain people who I know and gig with that refer to themselves as a celebrity. And I've gigged with numerous people who have said, oh, mate, only last week I heard someone was asked to do a 10-minute spot rather than a 20-minute spot. And they said, I'm a celebrity. I don't do tens. And I think
whoa.
having to do the social media thing, I think might knock off some of those stripes. But it does worry me that also there are going to be the people who are less in your face, the genuine kind of shy people that do comedy because they've never fitted in. And I do worry that they're going to get sort of overlooked for whatever reason.
Hmm. But we don't know where comedy's going to go. There's going to be changes, and I think the next big thing will probably be something we can't see because otherwise we'll probably be
Yeah.
doing it. But the thing is, I don't want to get out. I've forgotten now. Bloody hell! I did. Someone's saying that I'm a celebrity under 20, but that doesn't really make any. So the thing I want to say in that, and I had a chat with Joe Jacobs on the podcast. I like Joe Jacobs a lot, but I did it a couple of days in the podcast. It was from my side a terrible performance, but he's a cool guy and I like him a lot. But one of the things I was talking to with him is that one thing I found with those that are really popular in the comedy, most, not all, but most of the comedians that I've come across that have made it right to the top, who I've talked to and interacted with, have been quite easygoing and nice. Like
Yeah.
Simon Evans, for instance, he was lovely towards me. And I was a bit surprised by it because like you're more or less at the top and you've reached everything that most comics could ever meet. And you're wanting to chat with me on my podcast and be all cool with me, little old me. And it was really cool. But I'll get, some comics who aren't even pro yet trying to charge me to come on a podcast. Or I'll get all sorts of, but that's not everyone. I think there's
Hmm.
the odd few people that are at the top that are a bit fishy. But what's your experience? And yeah, that thing about 20 minutes. I mean, hold on. How do you perfect different things if you're only doing 20 minutes all the time? It,
I think it's just status angst, pride and ego talking because the truth of the matter was they were following Jack Whitehall who'd just done 10 minutes and they were nowhere near that level. But again, I think that speaks to that point I was making earlier on that comedy can fry your brain a little bit. And sometimes there is that thing of if you don't walk the walk, people think that you can't talk the talk. but I think it, it can manifest in weird ways, like telling people that they're a celebrity and telling them because they are a celebrity, you don't do 10 minutes. I think that's just fear basically talking of going, oh, but you don't think I'm as good as I want you to think I am, basically.
It's mad to hear that because it. I know that what's it called? Russell. What's his name? Oh, for fuck's sake, this is going to get me into trouble. He's Russell Kane, like one of the best comics in the country. He said in the Diary CEO podcast, he deliberately tries to perform in the most dodgy places where people don't know him, so he can keep his stuff sharp. And he's right at the top of the game. He's aware of that.
Oh,
Like,
100%. I think, yeah, and there's Russell Howard does, whenever he's trying out new stuff, he will always sit down. And I spoke to him about this, and he said the reason is that he knows that you can get like laughs from being big and walking around and doing. He wants to know if the actual words are funny, and then everything else is adding the cherry on top of the cake. I think the hardest thing about a job that is public facing, is that the people at the top possibly don't even realize they're at the top. And I've spoken to numerous taxi drivers and agents about this, and they always said it's not generally the people that are the top, say actors, politicians, whatever. It's the people that are sort of in the middle. They're the ones that are the worst because they are the ones that are most insecure. If you have, if you are your, I don't know, let's take an example. Barack Obama knows that he was a president of the United States of America. He probably has no real status angst about that. He might not be liked by everyone, he might be revered by others, but he knows that. Whereas a councillor in a Midwest state who is Billy Big Balls in the village, there is that status angst there because you're battling against it. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think that yeah, it's generally the people in the middle that have had a drink of the Kool-Aid that they're the ones that can sometimes be the worst.
yeah, I've heard that a lot. And what? Yeah, and what about ones at the bottom? No, I'm joking. No, it's I don't know where to go for me.
I feel bad because I feel bad because I've been rattling on and I've just seen the time.
No, I've enjoyed it. It's been, but one thing I want to say,
Yeah,
um, but you're not more. I noticed that, and I think even when you did my gig 9 years ago, you're a man of many different hats, right? So you're a presenter. You've also as you said, men's mental health campaigner, and what's it called? Yeah, you even did a TED talk, and you're an author. Like what? This is something I'm gonna do later on the podcast, and I'm gonna interview Rob Deering because Stefan, who's someone that
brilliant.
we've spoken to, says that Rob Deering, even though he's been doing comedy for many years, he has a life that's filled with a lot more than just comedy. And for you being involved in a lot of things, how does that fill your life? Because you're involved in so many other things that mean more than just comedy. Because you're also helping other guys who have mental health. You're teaching them comedy. You're writing mental health book that's helping people who have issues. You're like, how does that help your life? Because comedy is a great thing. We enjoy it, but there's more to life than comedy.
Yeah, but I'm almost envious of people that bam, they do comedy and that is uh it. I find that amazing and I find that laser sighted focus and resolve impressive. I just can't work like that through anxiousness, through perhaps lack of talent, whatever it is. But I think especially the pandemic showed everyone of like, if you put all of your eggs in one basket, then if that basket gets nicked, then you are screwed. And I quite like to spread my load. And if I'm entirely honest, I quite like to spread it further. And I think that's something that I'm certainly thinking of the moment is that perhaps I do need to diversify a little bit more because, the main things that I do are comedy, radio, and mental health. And perhaps I need to add another string to that bow. Um, but yeah, I personally am a big advocate for, sort of spread betting essentially, and sort of going for many different fields just so that you are propped up if one of them falls down.
Hmm. Yeah, that's it's yeah, it's getting your it's spread betting effectively, having a shot at lots of different things alongside the comedy, just because you never know what may really, really, really hit.
And also, you don't know. I think that's one of the things about comedy is that you can, and I was talking to a mate about this the other day, if you can be, sort of a resident at the best club in the world, but that can fall like that, like if you'd have said to me 10 years ago that the comedy cafe would no longer be around, I'd have been like, are you absolutely kidding me? Um, but it no longer exists. So you never know what's going to collapse. You never know what's going to stay around. And I think that's, if I'm entirely honest, that's the thing that really worries me is, what's going to stick and what's going to fall.
Okay. And for anyone that's listening on a podcast now, what is what is a quote that you follow that helps on the comedy journey, and how do people find out about you and your work?
Great question. I mean, I've already said that Russell Howard's one of you're only 6 months away from being the greatest comedian that you can be. And I think that's a really nice quote. But I think I would, it's not even a quote. I think I wish I'd have realized earlier on that people always spoke about comedy in such concrete terms of this is what you've got to do, this is what you're not doing, this is how people get on. And I think genuinely I'm a big believer in different people, different things. And there are some people that I have seen that started comedy well after me and are well further than I will absolutely ever be. There are also some people that started comedy way before me and are, pootling along quite happily. I think that it is such a big area that I think my advice would be take your advice carefully. No one has ever lived life before. We're all trying to muddle through it, and there isn't a handbook for life. You've just got to pick and choose whose advice you take.
Okay. I'm gonna that's yeah. I don't know what to say to that. That's brilliant.
Thank you, mate.
And how do they find out about your work?
That's very kind. If anyone is mad enough to want to know about anything I'm doing, everything is on my website, davechawner.co.uk, or on Instagram, Dave_Chawner, and also same with YouTube.
Right, guys, you know where to find out Dave. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. Next few guests we got on are two lovely ladies. We got Victoria Flynn from Chicago and New York. She gigs between both cities. And we got the fantastic Sarah Louise Young, who goes up to the Edinburgh Fringe. And I don't know how, but she really is conquering the Fringe. Not unlike the awards or anything, but she's always getting packed shows all the time. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. There are our next two guests, and we may be having a few clowns on. But yeah, I'll see you guys soon, okay? Well, not guys. I don't. Peter Buckley Hill corrected me and says, "Don't say guys." I'll see you all, listeners, friends, whatever you guys are. I'll see you guys. No, I'll see you at the next episode. Not guys.